Is sponsored by Circle Generation, but the Network Weaving Institute, FIDO Network, there are a bunch of us who have come together to think about how best to offer this. So we are excited to be here. Just a tiny bit about me. I have a background in campus community engagement, so mostly within higher education, but always working in the spaces between higher ed and communities. My tagline of my consulting practice now is learning to help heal the world. And by that I mean I am learning, but we are all learning and I can help with learning. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here today. This is our fabulous team. June, who many of you may know as sort of the founder of Network Weaving, was unable to join us today, but Carrie is here and Gemma and Adina, although she didn't give us a picture. Adina. We've done those breakout groups. So now, what is ripple effects mapping? Many of you probably know by now that it is an asset-oriented, participatory evaluation practice that brings to light planned and unplanned consequences of a thing, a program, an activity, an intervention, a collaboration, a network. And really importantly, it builds trust and connection among participants, even as we are doing the evaluation work, which is kind of a big deal. It's especially useful for understanding longer-term consequences and impacts of networks or projects, which we all recognize as one of the challenges of conventional approaches. I also like to add that we consider it one of several forms of democratically engaged assessment. This is a set of approaches, a way to think about assessment that I sort of co-authored with a handful of friends and colleagues. And we focused in particular on some of the methodological cousins to ripple effects mapping, like outcomes harvesting. Really importantly, ripple effects mapping, I'm going to start calling it REM because I'm going to start tripping over the three words. REM is a really valuable companion to other methods of evaluation. And so I mention that because in the category of what is it not, it's not a standalone replacement, usually for more conventional means of assessment. And I'll talk in a minute about why. It is also not objective. It is not empirical. It does not employ random sampling. It does not seek to understand all of the outcomes or impacts of a program, project, or network. And again, I mention that because it's important that if your funders, deans, directors, powers that be need those things, it's especially important to make sure that REM is a method in your portfolio. So it arose because of some common challenges with conventional assessment and evaluation. REM was created first by teams of colleagues from Extension. Those of you in the US may know, but cooperative extension is essentially the effort, the structural effort to help the knowledge of and the work of a university extend out into its state more broadly. So they do a lot of community development, for example. And then they were saying, you know, the ways that we're being asked to assess community development doesn't really do it justice. So they came up with REM as a different way. They wanted to get past the accounting tendency of conventional evaluation, right? Because as I like to think of it, evaluation, right? The true value of a thing well exceeds headcounts, program numbers, dollars spent, right? Also, conventional evaluation is typically driven by interests and agendas beyond those of its participants. And those powers that be, as we know, often value what can be easily measured. And the methods used for it sometimes contrast pretty jarringly with program methods. So trust building participatory work and can be pretty significantly undermined by top-down expert-driven surveys or a really tight focus on causality that says, your experience doesn't matter because we can't prove that it's real or that it was caused by a certain thing. And lastly, conventional assessment and evaluation tends to be bound by the limits of its own knowledge, right? So we don't ask about things that we don't know to ask about. And most of those methodologies don't have quite enough room for curiosity or for learning the unexpected. So by contrast, ripple effects mapping asks about impacts. It asks about what works and how it works. And it uses the but-for principle. This is their response to sort of, well, how do we know for sure that it caused it? We're not going to pretend we know that this intervention caused this impact. But if respondents self-report on changes that they say would not have happened but for this program that we are evaluating, that is the threshold in ripple effects mapping. So it's really rooted in trust. It's rooted in believing the people who speak. It's rooted in centering the voices of those who are central in the program. It can also be tailored very closely to the interests of the program and its participants, both in terms of the focus question that guides the session and in terms of how we facilitate. I'm getting a little verklempt. So for me, one of my favorite things about REM is that it is relational. It is asset oriented. It is story-based, and so it builds trust and can even feel celebratory, deepening participants' sense of connection. I have a colleague who's a very frequent practitioner who always does a little survey at the end of her REM sessions, asking people, did this have, one of these certain effects that she has learned over the years are the most common? And one is about building trust, and it's like 98% of people say, I feel much more trusting in this group of people, and I feel much more connected to this group of people. And so lastly, ripple effects mapping is fabulous at surfacing unexpected, unintended consequences of a program, which, as we all know, can be very important. So for me, the biggest reason that I use REM is because it helps us assess the realities of what good collaboration looks like. And I'm aware network evaluation has many interesting approaches to this. Um, I love this mental model. It's the thing that I probably teach most in all of my contexts. It's from the Interaction Institute for Social Change. And it posits that results are only one dimension of success. Now, we know that most Western cultures privilege results over everything else. You probably, like me, have actually been in a space where people are getting together for the first time and the leader says, look, we need to hurry up and get down to business. We don't have time to get to know each other. And I don't know your experience, but mine was that work didn't go very far because relationship matters enormously. Work with human beings always depends on process and on relationship to help us generate results. This also means that process and relationship are themselves essential dimensions of success. And ripple effects mapping can help us understand and evaluate those. From my own work, I can give you an example. I've done a lot of work as a program officer and have had numerous conversations with grantees who have said, our team had the best of intentions, but we really aren't getting anywhere. I'm so sorry. We haven't made any progress in the last 6 months. And I say, that's cool. What have you done? Well, every Tuesday morning we get together for coffee. So we're getting to know each other well. And I guess we've developed a better sense of how to work together, but we're not doing anything yet. At which point I smile wryly to myself and I point out, hey, you are building process and you are building relationship. And honestly, that is what is going to get you to results. I would rather see you lay that valuable foundation than try to leapfrog over it and imagine that you can get results without them. So in terms of the practicality of ripple effects mapping, these are some of the reasons that I have chosen it and that clients that I have worked with have chosen it. It can be as small scale as you want to be. It is remarkably low cost, especially for the high impact outcomes that it can generate. And it's very time efficient. A typical REM session might last 90 minutes to 2 hours, which of course is a far cry from, a standard evaluation practice. It generates powerful stories and testimonies. It makes visible key aspects of program success and network effects. One little example from that, I was using REM to assess a set of partnerships which involved a number of immigrant serving organizations, all working with the same university. And one of them mentioned a person who had been an important mentor and to her and to her organization. And then another person a little bit later shared the same name. And I said, as the facilitator, out of curiosity, hands up if you've worked with this person, if this person has been a mentor to you. Every hand in the space went up. Nobody knew that this individual was mentoring everybody else in the space. They all thought that they were the one lucky recipient of her mentorship. And it was a big deal. It made a big difference to the kinds of support that were able to be channeled to that kind of mentorship and organizational development work. The asset orientation of ripple effects mapping is not Pollyanna. It can surface challenges even as it focuses on what works. So one of the things I love about it is that it gets us beyond the space of criticism. Academics, most of us are trained to be really critical and to pick out the thing that isn't working and then talk about why it's not working. Um, I recognize the value of that, but I would much rather hear about, okay, so that thing wasn't working. What did you do to overcome it? How did that go? If all the people in the space are saying this is an approach that I used in order to overcome this challenge, you're still getting all the info you need on the challenge, but you're getting the positive approaches and the emphasis on success that actually helps us learn how to keep doing better. It also feels good. And that celebratory feel can build trust and connection among participants, as I'd mentioned. REM also avoids survey fatigue and tunnel vision. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the work of organizations like Chicago Beyond. And, there are many particularly designated as vulnerable groups that are dramatically overstudied. And ripple effects mapping can offer a wholly different way of inviting people into assessment-oriented conversations. And lastly, as I'd said before, it can document long-term and hard to quantify outcomes. So how does it work? Ripple effect mapping begins with a focus question, typically one, sometimes two. I'm pretty allergic to more than that. I'm a huge fan of one. And we try to make these capacious yet focused. So if we really want to understand the impacts of a network within this community, the focus question might very well say, tell us a story about an impact that you felt was really important that this network has had within the community. Or we might say, tell us a story of a surprising yet important outcome emerging from this network. We might ask, what connections has this network helped you cultivate with others and how? Or we might ask, what important growth has occurred that might not have but for this network? So they're often, but not always, story-based. When we have that question, we then invite people to maybe 5 minutes of individual reflection so they can sort of flesh out their story a little bit. Then we team people up in pairs to do appreciative interviews. I have a little cheat sheet. There are many such things in the world about what appreciative interviewing is. I confess I am a big fan of ripple effects mapping as a covert strategy for teaching appreciative inquiry because I think all of us humans need more training and practice in how to do that. Once the appreciative interviews have happened, we invite everyone back to the main group. If this is an in-person session, we're typically arranged in a horseshoe with a big whiteboard up at the front. If it's online, we simply come out of breakout groups and back to the main session. And then begins the group interviewing, which is really just a storytelling time. Timekeeping can be important. And while people tell their stories, we do some mind mapping.
Mm.
Typically, in an ideal world, you will have a facilitator, you will have a mapper, and if it is in person, you'll have a third person who is doing remote mapping, so using XMind or Miro or whatever your software of choice is. Um, if you do not have a team that large, it's okay. I have done plenty of this solo, either in person or online. It can be harder to map and talk at the same time. There is a hidden advantage, which is that if you tell people in advance, this is going to be sloppy because I'm talking with you while I am mapping this, you can invite them to say, if you see me missing something or misrepresenting something, pause me, raise a hand, let's get it right. So it can work in multiple ways. At the end of this, then, you will have a map, a concept map, generally pretty sloppy. And then we do the last section, which is beholding, is the fancy term a friend of mine used. It's really just a form of collective analysis and meaning making. And so we say, all of us together, what do we see? What themes are emerging? What patterns have we noticed? What are some gaps? Um, an example of a really important, valuable thing somebody noticed when I was doing this with a group. We were evaluating a program that had multiple components. Three of the four components were discussed at length, and the fourth one was never even mentioned. And so somebody at the beholding time was like, why is that not in here? And everybody realized, oh no, it's not that it wasn't important. It's just that it wasn't the source of their very best stories. So it enabled us to then do some very quick, okay, but this was valuable for you, why, etc. So the kinds of products that you get. Good stories, honestly, are, I think, the most important one. My particular favorite is a university community partnership where the university offered basically science, tech, engineering, and math, STEM enrichment work for teachers. It had a summer institute. They got a student assistant from the university to support their new curriculum throughout the year, and they had an equipment fund. One teacher mentioned in her story about impacts that using the equipment fund to buy a 3D printer was a very big deal. These teachers were all from very low income. Um, the community, the district as a whole, was a very low income district. This was the only 3D printer in the school. She said the day I set it up, I had a line of teachers around down the hall. And so I said casually, wow, how many people ended up actually using it? And she came up with a number. And I said, so how many disciplines? And she said, well, that was the cool part. You know, I had an art teacher develop some collaborative content with me. She was a science teacher. We had, I don't even remember all of them, but there were like 5 or 6 disciplines represented. And I said, so off the top of your head, how many classes and so how many students do you think? And this whole thing took, 5 minutes in the 2-hour conversation. The director of the university partnership program was in the space and heard all of this. 2 or 3 days later, she was called into a meeting with the funder. And the funder said, so next year, I'm thinking about giving up on the equipment piece of this project because it seems so privatized. It seems like it benefits so few people. It's just one individual class. So that director was very excited to be able to say, actually, here's a story for you. y'all bought this 3D printer, and it ended up serving hundreds and hundreds of children, right? So you get good stories. If you do this online and you have permission to record, you also have beautiful video testimonials. And I have colleagues who have created lovely little sort of fundraising videos out of those to very good effect. You also often learn new directions for further inquiry. That same teacher training program, for example, had a very surprising finding that the single most important impact wasn't the community partnerships, wasn't the student support, wasn't the equipment. The single biggest impact was for the first time these teachers felt seen and valued by this university. Prior to that, their only interaction with the university had mostly been with its security, right? If they wandered onto campus. And so that became like university relations was very interested in that. Oh, we've created something that works to actually build trusting partnerships. And so that created opportunities for new spin-offs and for advancement of programs and partnerships. You can also get quantitative results. So, for example, 100% of participants said that being seen and valued by that university was the single biggest impact of the program. Um, you can get great ideas for follow-up surveys and other kinds of data that you can render quantitative. You also get, of course, very rich qualitative data that you can code and analyze. When REM was first created, they were using the 8 community capitals framework to code what they were learning. Some people will use program descriptions. These are the purposes of our programs, and so now we can code all responses accordingly. Many different ways to go at that. You get visual maps, which are awesome and can have multiple purposes. And as I mentioned, that stronger sense of connection, trust, and often pride among group members. So this is to give you a sense of how very sloppy, and I know it's better if other people have better handwriting. Mine is atrocious. But this is actually a forecasting kind of ripple effects mapping that I did with a group as part of strategic planning. We said 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what do you want to be able to say about this center that we're talking about building? Picture the news article that you want to read about this important stuff that it did. And so the stories are multifold, right? They have all these little offshoots. And this is honestly one of the hardest parts of ripple effects mapping is learning your way to go ahead and do this. The colors can track individual people. They can track themes. I often will go through and use a certain color to underline a particular theme. So that's an example of an in-person map. This is an example of an X-Mind map.
And Anna, before
Yes.
you go to this one, I just want to point out that there was a question in the chat.
Oh, thank you, because I can't see
Um,
the chat.
I know exactly, so I'm going to read it to you.
Perfect.
Can you say a little more about how to get quantitative data from REM? Is it just about numbers of participants in the room who said a particular thing?
So there are many different approaches to this. The example I gave was, yes, exactly that. Um, Often the best ways to generate quantitative data from it are to use what you learned in surveys or other approaches. So, for example, the colleague I mentioned who asks who does a survey at the end of every REM session about what did this uh, offer you? What were the most valuable things for you about participating in this REM session? She now has data, 6 or 7 different impacts, and she has data for each session and data across her sessions averaged as a whole. But those answers came originally from REM respondents. So that's often a typical pairing. You learn something new through REM, and then you can set about getting the quantitative data that you want from that. Was there anything else in this, or? I will also add that people who are very serious qualitative data nuts, which I am not, um, have whole additional skill sets in generating quant from qual. So that's, of course, another way to approach this, one I am less well equipped to talk about. Um,
One more question.
yes.
How many people did you work with when you used REM, when you used the whiteboard?
Yes. So the whiteboard one was, what were there, 9 of us, perhaps? A typical REM session ideally is between 6 and 12. I know folks who've done 17, it gets messy, but if you have good mappers at hand, it can work. I have done it with groups as small as 4, at which point it's really more of a group storytelling that I happen to be mapping. Um, but yeah, I would say, my ideal is maybe 9 or 10, because what you also get is stories bouncing off one another. Somebody says, let's see if my next one has an example of this. Okay, so the print is way too small to read, but one of the things we found, this was a small group with only 4 participants, but they found some real synergies among their stories, and they had not spoken together before. And so, as we did the beholding, we were finding really useful themes that were synergistic. And so we mapped these out. We were also finding action items, things everybody said, what needs to happen next. And so we decided to map those out too. So this is a sort of post-beholding with minimal analysis example. And I will mention software-wise, I am a big fan of XMind. Its one weakness is that for other people to really use and play with the maps, they need to download it too, but it is free. I have friends who are big users of various other kinds of software that engage concept mapping, so they will use that. Entirely up to you. This was a less attractive thematic analysis that we did after the fact of a faculty community of practice that I ran. And so there were 16 people, I think, in that group. So it was a much bigger, much messier process. But one of the things that we found was power, discussions about power at many levels were one of the most important cross-cutting themes. And so we did a lot of
Hi.
later to pull those together. Was there another question there that I was? No? Okay.
You actually have two more questions.
Oh, okay.
Are you okay with taking questions throughout, Anna, or do you want us to
I
hold?
I am. I think this is actually the last slide before questions, though. So maybe I'll just mention um, these last bits. These were things that June had brought forward as especially important for us to name in the context of network evaluation. So because impact networks use really deliberate relational processes to generate emergent outcomes, ripple effects mapping can be super useful to document that range of outcomes as well as the range of relationships and how those are flowing and moving. You'll often find little things like, a very old example, I was doing this with students who were all very heavily involved in community engagement. And it turned out, despite the fact they were from all different disciplines, every single student in the group had taken a class with one or the other of two especially awesome faculty, and cited that faculty member as a significant influence in their choice to do a lot of community engagement. That was critical network data for us in terms of our efforts to boost community engagement across the college. REM also allows network participants and funders, if you involve them, to reflect and to learn together. The process makes possible for all involved to realize that trust, not control, is a viable way of creating meaningful results. This one's really important for me. I'm a big believer in managing up, and that part of our work is to train the powers that be in other ways of understanding impact and other ways of building relationship and doing this work in the world. And lastly, REM helps us navigate complex challenges and situations, especially where the optimal approach is participatory. It's very good at not only practicing, but helping us see how we probe and sense and respond and reflect and repeat. Um, so, a few more resources here. These are clickable links. When you get this, you can check them out. The single most detailed is the field guide to ripple effects mapping. If you want to go ahead and Google that, it's a free download from the University of Minnesota Press, or you can get a hard copy. Should you ever want to reach out to me, that is my Gmail, Anna S. Bartel. Um, Yes, all right. I am going to stop sharing so we can get at those other two questions, and then I think we have a little more breakout grouping to do. Adina, what were those two
Okay,
other?
here we go. We actually are up to three now.
Oh,
So
yay.
the first question was, who are the people convened for the REM session? What
Mhm.
roles? Where do they come from? And so on.
Such a good question, and always a difficult decision to make. Uh, there are many schools of thought on this. Um, some people say get your best storytellers. Some people say get all of your frontline people. Some folks say get all of your sort of back of house systems people. I am honestly a big fan of figuring out who are our various sort of publics and what are the groups of the participants. I will often map that with teams in advance to figure out, do we want, so for example, the university partnership one, do we want to do REM with community partners and separate REMs with the university partners? Because we know that power dynamics are such that it can be hard for community members to say, here's something that really didn't work for me, and I wish we did it differently. Um, in that particular instance, we talked it through and everybody agreed, let's do mixed groups because these teams have been working together for years and they have robust partnerships. So I would say, really think carefully about how you want to do this. Negativity and disruption are your biggest challenges. And I don't mean by that find only people who love, love, love what's going on, but find people who are willing or just sort of lay the ground rules in advance, which we do through the appreciative interviewing guide, that the point of this is not to talk about what doesn't work. We have so many opportunities to do that, and we're really good at it. The point here is to talk about what does work. And so I have had plenty of situations where a client has said, has pulled me aside, a hand on the arm, and has said, so Anna, we've got a difficult person in the room who trends negative, and I've done a lot of work, but I wanted to invite you to think about reframing as one of your intentional practices in this group because I think it's going to be necessary. Worked really well, you know, very useful as a facilitator to have that warning.
So our next question, curious at what stages you usually do this. Do you ever get nervous ahead of the session that people won't have a lot to share or will say, well, nothing yet? So thinking about multi-year groups.
Yes. Um, Again, an excellent question. I have advised people to push pause. If you are in a 3-year program and you are pretty close to the beginning of the first year, you may want to do a check-in, an evaluative ground truthing, a course correction. There are many ways to ask, how is this going and what else do you need from us? Ripple effects mapping works best at, say, the end of year one, end of year two, end of year three. It works beautifully for alumni of a program. Um, a year or two out, what changes have you seen? We haven't seen each other in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years. What else has emerged for you in that time? And I will say some of those are amazing. My New York State Assembly representative, Anna Kellis, was one of my faculty fellows 9 years ago. That's the faculty community of practice that I led. I had a practice of pairing people by interest. She had a huge interest in poverty alleviation. There was a social scientist in our group, ditto. Those two got paired together. I learned last year that now that she is an elected representative, one of the things that she does all the time is to send any anti-poverty legislation while it's in committee to this faculty member who is brilliant and amazing and a terrific source of advice. But so, like that little choice 9 years ago in a small group of faculty is literally affecting state policy right now, which is super cool. That's the kind of, if you do it far enough ex post facto, you get some really cool findings. I'm not sure if I answered that question. Oh, timing. Yes. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that the sort of technology of REM can be used really beautifully in strategic planning. So the example that I gave you, the hand-drawn map, what do you want us to have done if you cast your mind 5 or 10 years into the future? That works beautifully. I've done it with a number of groups. I always find it a little bit weird to call it ripple effects mapping because it's sort of desired ripple effects mapping. But we do it the exact same way and it works. And there are many folks who will use this for organizational development for a range of other kinds of purposes.
So we still have three more questions, but we're getting towards the top of the hour. I was thinking maybe I'll read one more and
Mhm.
then we'll come back to any additional questions after we do our breakout groups.
Perfect.
Okay. So the next one is you mentioned the ideal group size is 9 to 10. I have two programs that have 6 people involved. Is that too small to be most valuable, or would it work to combine the groups even though they don't know each other? They have been in the same program. So curious whether people need to know each other, have participated in something together, or if that's not most important.
Another great question. I would say it's largely up to you. 6 is by no means too small. Um, I actually sort of love doing 6 because it's very personal, and especially if you have, coffee or lunch or whatever, it's fun to make this more of sort of an event. Um, I would say it really depends on your objectives. If, for example, the two groups were facilitated differently or by a different person, there would be a concrete benefit to holding them separately because you might learn different things about, that could help inform that facilitation practice and the impacts that it had. If they are really all the same, or you're not interested in that, or you want to see how the ideas bounce off one another, and maybe one group has been thinking this way and the other group has been thinking a totally different way, and putting them together could be very fertile and generative, that might be a reason to consciously choose to put them together. There's a lot of nuance. That's why we say practice, not method.